Welcome to our community. I'm Michael Levy, President of the Digital Health Institute for Transformation, or DHIT for short. We've teamed up with Crowdicity and the Assist Center at North Carolina State University to launch this exciting virtual incubator. COVID-19 has created a worldwide crisis that has shaken our communities to the core. The virus's toll on human life and our standard of life cannot be overstated. However, the present crisis creates an opportunity. We can come together as innovators to create new solutions that solve real problems, not only related to COVID-19, but which can be sustained long after the pandemic. We're all in this together, and we need your ideas, your input, and your energy. We need status quo challengers, those with great ideas, potential game-changing solutions, and practicing care providers and public health officials to help us submit, comment, vote, test, and develop. I'll turn things over to my co-host Adam Curry to invite you to participate in our challenges.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Adam Curry, Innovation Ecosystem Director at the Assist Center. We've worked with thought leaders in healthcare, research, and industry to identify some of the key health challenges facing us in light of COVID-19. Through this incubator, we are presenting these challenges to the innovator community. We want all of you innovators to submit and share your ideas for solving these problems, and we want everyone, inventors, entrepreneurs, people in large companies and small companies, those giving care and those who've received care, to provide your insights on the ideas you see posted. You'll find all of the challenges presented on the welcome page. Click on Challenge to learn more and post your idea about how to address it. Also, take a chance to review the other submitted ideas and provide your own insights. You may see a chance to collaborate with someone else in the community. If so, reach out and have a deeper discussion. As we move toward the end of the incubator, we'll invite final proposals, which you can submit as an individual or maybe as a team that you've formed. And our judges panel will select the most promising proposals to move on. Now, if you're in a company or other organization with an interest in improving healthcare, we are actively seeking people like you to partner with us in this initiative. Join us as a program champion, and you can issue sub-challenges to help your organization find the right solutions. Or be an innovation champion and create an innovation award for an idea that stands above the rest. Finally, you can join us as a program supporter and let the community know that you're with us in fighting persistent healthcare challenges. Over the course of the incubator, we'll also be hosting a webinar series to inform the challenges. I'll turn it back over to Michael now to tell you more about it.
Thank you, Adam. To spark discussion and catalyze ideas to these challenges, we're hosting a series of webinars every 2 weeks that bring together subject matter experts and thought leaders to educate the ecosystem regarding the many challenges and opportunities to advance care and utilize emerging technologies. The combination of these didactic expert panels and the crowdsourcing of ideas through the incubator create an engine to propel innovations from ideation to development to impact. Upon final submission of your ideas, our ecosystem of experts and champions will review them and select winners and recipients to our challenges and special innovation awards. Here's to building a cloud community to drive ground immunity. Welcome panelists, welcome audience. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. Many thanks for joining us for another episode of the Digital Health Institute for Transformation's podcast and web series, DHIT Frequency, where health transformers, problem solvers, innovators come together to discuss best practices, next practices, all else in the digital health space, specifically anchored to this season's focus of COVID unites us all. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Michael Levy, your co-host today, DHIT's president. I'm joined, as I have been for now a number of months, my co-host Adam Curry, Innovation Ecosystem Director at the Assist Center. Morning, Adam.
Morning.
Hoping you're still on a high from Father's Day. I certainly are right now. It seems like just those little glimpses of purity and joy, are needed to get us, going and motivated and powered through another week of this pandemic and another week of isolation and the realities that we're all kind of challenged with. So I hope you had a nice Father's Day, as well as everyone else out there in the world that experienced such joy from their children. Look, last couple of episodes, Adam, we were digging into remote monitoring from an organ specific perspective. Last episode we focused on cardiac. The episode before, it was pulmonary. I feel like those are very specific and somewhat self-explanatory as we look at remote monitoring for those organs. Today, biochemical sensing. My opinion, I'm not an expert in the field, but it's a little amorphous. It's a little, left to be understood from my perspective. So maybe the first thing we do for our audience is, maybe level set on what is biochemical sensing, compared to physical sensing or physical transducers. Maybe you can give a little bit of a level set for us before we dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's actually not common in where we normally discuss wearables, remote monitoring, and it's early days. So I think that's a big part of it. As you said, wearables on the market, we think about physical measurements of what we can see to understand what the body's doing. So tracking motion sensor to estimate activity, or optical measurements to get pulse or electrical activity, to understand heart rate. But at Assist and some other places, some really exciting research going on to develop wearable biochemical sensors, which measure chemicals present in the body in things like sweat or saliva, interstitial fluid. And in a lot of ways, that's considerably more challenging. So a lot of people understand or be familiar with continuous glucose monitors, right? Just to have a reference point as something that is on the market. But there aren't a lot. So biochemical sensors, definitely different from what we generally see in the public right now. But our panelists can help us understand it in a lot more detail. So we're looking forward to that.
Awesome.
On that topic, we have a really great panel to help us understand the latest research and needs in the field from multiple perspectives. So we have Murat Yokas, a researcher within the Biointerface Lab at the Assist Center. He's going to help us see some of the cutting edge work in the area, especially for wearables, which is his specialty. We also have Dr. Stanko Skrtic, a Senior Science and Innovation Medical Director for AstraZeneca. He's going to share insights from the industry perspective. And Dr. Karen Leitner, an internal medicine physician working in telehealth and medical advocacy. Karen's also the medical director for Teledoc's virtual transgender medical home. Karen will give us, or Dr. Leitner will give us, a clinical perspective as we explore the technical possibilities and the various applications that exist now for COVID and for health and wellness in general.
Thanks, Adam. That was super helpful and just a nice foundation for us before we dig in and understand, both the kind of current maturity of the space of biochemical sensing, and then what potential applications and innovative care could be delivered with the help of. So thanks. Before we kick off, like I do every episode of this season's focus of COVID-19 Unites Us All, I want to send our thoughts, energy, and overarching prayers to those on the front line caring for individuals, trying to save lives, those who are working at preserving their livelihood at home through these tough economic realities, and those who are fighting for their life and fighting for their health and wellness. It's why all of us get up every morning, both during this pandemic and before and after. We are health transformers and problem solvers at heart, but we're human beings that care for one another. So on behalf of DHIT, Assist, our panelists, our audience, we are sending that energy out. With that, I'd love to thank our sponsors our many supporters who are supporting our COVID-19 United All series, as well as our virtual incubator. Thank you.
Thank you to our program champion, Pfizer Digital, as well as our innovation champion ecosystem, including our 2 new additions, Hangar 6 and Soto IP. Thank you to our partners for making this possible.
Absolutely, we do appreciate our sponsors. One note before we jump in, we welcome participation from the audience. So use the Q&A section to send questions over, and we'll tackle as many of those as we can with our panel toward the end of the program. So to kick things off, Maria, I want to start with you. I briefly described biochemical sensors, definitely not my area of expertise, but hopefully got it mostly right. Could you explain more perhaps about what biochemical includes, what we mean by it, and then maybe how some biochemical sensors work?
Sure. So biochemical sensors are essentially they're biosensors, and they're used for converting chemical information into a measurable signal. So different from the physical sensors, biochemical sensors, they utilize biorecognition elements such as enzymes, antibodies, aptamers, or nucleic acids for specifically binding to an analyte of interest. Then as a result of this binding, there is also a change, and this can be electrical signal, electrical current, or optical signal that can be measured with a wearable electronic system. So things that can be measured with biochemical sensors, it can include detection of electrolytes, metabolites, hormones, even in drugs.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Those are the kinds of things that go through my mind as I think about a biochemical sensor. It's a very broad term, so that's helpful. And some of those things we can already begin to think about. Okay, yeah, I've heard some of that in the clinical, kind of diagnostic or monitoring. So I'm going to look forward to getting to that. I did want to jump to Dr. Skirtic for just a second, though, and get a little bit more framing of the topic. We mentioned glucose monitors as a biochemical sensor that's on the market now that people are using. Are there others that you're aware of on the market? And do they hit the mark for a company like AstraZeneca, or do you see still a lot of gaps in the market?
Well, there are others. I mean, in the inhaled field, you have the NOx sensors, for example. But in terms of small metabolite sensors, there's not anything like the glucose that has validated for continuous measurements. We have a number of in clinical trial use for measuring other things. For example, ketone bodies are around, but nothing that's on the market with such an established long and big piece of validation and a number of different technical solutions as well, addressing the same biomarker glucose. But so if I may elaborate a little bit from our industry perspective regarding the use here, it's very much, I like to divide this into different bins. If you're talking about the R&D part, or if we're talking about the commercial market part, because we always have to start with our early clinical studies. So whatever it is, it has to be in a journey, and irrespective of the chemical domain, what we are always interested in is measuring, for example, proof of mechanism biomarkers in our phase 1A, phase 1B studies. And that's just for our own internal decision making. So it means also that the regulatory requirements for that type of sensing is completely lower, because it's just our internal decision making criteria that are key for qualifying for that purpose. But then as quickly as we start to move into larger settings, especially when we take the step into a pivotal dose finding phase 2B, then the regulatory hurdle goes up considerably. So let's say that we want to utilize biochemical sensing as determine a proof of principle or proof of concept, and want to include that in a pivotal phase 2B or a pivotal phase 3, then the hurdle is much higher. And what has hampered now is that it's not that many techniques or either analytes or analytical principles that has been shown that we can actually utilize in a pivotal setting. So most of the things that we and I think the industry are exploring is still in a much kind of exploratory clinical setting or in early clinical for internal decision making.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a really helpful distinction, I think, to understand that it's not just market, which I already brought up when we think about the clinic, but those earlier stages that lead to that and support the research that go up to it. Want to get to Dr. Leitner as a practicing physician, one on the front lines of caring for patients through certainly direct means, but increasingly thinking about remote for you guys, at Teladoc. What are you thinking about as far as the potential, maybe the need in this area, where the gaps are?
Yeah, thank you. I think that this is such early days for clinical use. We're still, I think, much more focused on what we already have and is usable and measurable and validated and clinically relevant. So, the remote blood pressure monitors and oxygen saturations and EKGs and things like that. But I think that this is a really interesting and exciting frontier. I almost feel like we're talking about the future here. I don't know. I think about when I was a kid, I had a book on, the telephone, and it was sort of like, one day you'll be able to talk to someone and see them on video while you're talking to them. And it was like, oh, how is that ever going to happen? But I think in thinking about some of this, that's where we are now. It's like one day we will be able to do some really incredible things with these technologies, and we're still really at the frontier of starting to think about it, but there's a lot of possibility out there.
So I totally get that, and appreciate the regulatory and the kind of cultural and various other pathways that are naturally prudent to mature from idea, possibility to commercial deployment and adoption. But we have this pandemic that's very real right now, and we've seen the exponential maturation of technical adoption and the otherwise fast track of therapeutics and vaccine development, et cetera. I read a study just recently that showed significant molecular changes in the blood for severe COVID patients versus mild COVID patients. And I'm going to direct it to Murat from a technical perspective, and then perhaps Dr. Leitner, you can jump in from a if so, then could we apply it, and what would that mean? But your wristwatch, the technologies on that you're seeing right now, could this not be a potential opportunity for us to start to perhaps utilize to curb some of the severity of this pandemic?
Definitely. So briefly, I want to give a background information for the audience of what we do in our lab. So we are developing wearable biochemical systems for continuous monitoring of human physiology non-invasively. Specifically, we are interested in sweat, monitoring biomarker levels from sweat and transmitting this data to a cell phone or a tablet for further processing or giving feedback to the users. So the type of biomarkers the platform detects for now is glucose. Definitely, this is a biomarker important for diabetic people. And also lactate is a biomarker for the human exertion and performance. Additionally, we are combining these biomarkers with other physiological sensors to better understand the overall health status. Going back to the detecting biomarkers related to COVID-19, sweat non-invasive fluid has different biomarkers additional to metabolites and electrolytes. For example, it includes biomarkers of inflammatory system or immune system. This can be cytokines, interleukin-6 or interleukin-10. This has been shown to be increasing, especially if the in the severe COVID patients towards end of the like 15 days or 20 days. Also, it's important to understand how the levels of the cytokines in blood and sweat correlates. And it's been shown that the cytokine levels, they're actually one-to-one related in terms of concentration. So with the slight modification of biosensing system in our wearable sensor, by using antibodies or aptamers, it's possible to detect these biomarkers of immune system so that we can better understand the status of the patient continuously.
Very helpful. And so, you know, okay, we don't have that in market today. Let's assume, you know, 10 years from now, we have that potential of wearing wristwatches that have this mechanism. I'm assuming, Dr. Leitner, that this would be a wealth of information that would find its way into, you know, some, you know, EHR record that you have access to, or some alert clinical decision support, you know, analytic that is helping you deliver care in your practice. Can you imagine, you know, what that type of value stream would look like, and what do you know, COVID aside, are there you know, kind of, you know, aspects of what you can track, what Murat just articulated, that you're like, oh yeah, that would be amazingly helpful right now. I can prioritize, you know, what we're collecting for, you know, your patients that you're seeing today.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what you're talking about is just identifying who's the most at risk, right? And that's what you're always trying to do. It's like, which patient needs your attention the most? So it's giving care to the right patient at the right time. And especially for COVID, since there's such a wide and disparate presentation clinically in patients, it would be really helpful to have a biomarker that alerted you to the people who are the most at risk for getting very ill. But, you know, like if we're talking 10 years in the future, I think what's to sort of distill it down, you're almost talking about a replacement for the need to do blood work. And that's, in preparing for this conversation, what I kept coming back to is like, if you could just have a way to measure any number of blood tests that don't require a patient to come to your lab, that don't require, you know, 50 needle sticks. Let's say it's something you're trending over time, similarly to what the blood glucose monitor has done. But, you know, from reading some of your research, Murat, the measurables right now are fairly limited. You know, it's pH, it's lactate, it's maybe some electrolytes. It's really interesting to hear you talk about inflammatory cytokines. But there's all sorts of routine blood work that we do that if we could just have that information without requiring that we could do it virtually, it would change things really dramatically. Because right now, we always are delivering, and you know, we're making decisions based on a snapshot of what's going on in that patient at one moment in time, versus having the ability to, you know, to watch it over time, or to continuously do it, and to not require an in-person visit to do their blood work. Yeah. So.
May I build on that, because that is a really good comment, and it reflects very much both my personal thinking and how I think also many in the industry are thinking as well. Because where we are looking very much is where we can utilize conventional, if I call it conventional, already clinically established biomarkers that are used for decision making. And we would like to simplify the logistics, basically, so that the patient doesn't have to have the hassle going in, because that enables us both more a user-friendly setting of running clinical trials. But what it does primarily is much more frequent monitoring in a user-friendly way. And by getting more data points over time, we can, in clinical trials, for example, reduce the sample size. That has a tremendous time and cost saving, primarily time. but also from a physician-patient perspective later on in the clinic, if we utilize that biomarker for as a segmentation biomarker or as a treatment response, we can simplify the clinical paradigm and make the treatment much more affordable to a wider population of patients as well. And that's where we see that the kind of the digital biochemical sensing promise, if it's 5 or 10 years, it has the potential to transform things. And then I think it's really important to pick and work on already validated biomarkers used for clinical decision making. Because if you're picking something that's just been used in clinical research, has some kind of association, you have to be cognizant it's a very, very long journey to establish and validate that biomarker, how you will utilize it for clinical decision making. It's not done overnight. So, okay, I mean, you know, even if we have hundreds of cytokines, yes, but what type of decisions will you make out of them? We know they correlate with the inflammatory pathway, but you can take the temperature as well. Yeah, so you have to think, what's the easiest, quickest, clinically robust way of making decisions? And that's how much we look on biomarker and sensing when we work with when we pack it together with our drugs as well, because it has to work in the clinic, whatever we put as a decision making platform.
So that's really interesting. It makes me think about what Murat's talking about the sample, as well as you're talking about the biomarker. Are there hurdles to introduce a new sample type? For instance, interstitial fluid, does that present a hurdle, as much as discovering a new or proposing a new biomarker?
Yes, it does, because we're not always aware of the kind of the kinetics of that fluid, of that tissue compartment. So if we take interstitial fluid, we have to then, if we're utilized to have a venous blood samples for that biomarker, and then you measure that interstitial fluid, we have to fully understand the variability and variance that goes with that sampling method in all kinds of settings, in different patient segments, temperatures, whatever, so that we understand where are the pitfalls and where are the strength points of measuring things in the interstitial fluid, even if it's a conventional thing that's been measured for decades. But if it's been done in blood, it's been documented in blood. And that's not a small single one-off study that you do. It's a number of studies with different conditions over time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it kind of highlights the challenge to bringing something with great potential benefit and great promise, right? So non-invasive, completely non-invasive. Not having to get blood, right, as Dr. Leitner I think alluded to, but it's a challenge and it's going to take time. I think that's what I'm hearing. Another thing, it just seems like kind of hearing 3 different categories, maybe in a way, of remote monitoring or measurement, right? Let's just say remote measurement at home. You can do a snapshot in time kind of test. And that could help a clinical trial, or it could help somebody's remote care. And then there's the real-time monitoring, which I guess also could be used for those too. Dr. Leitner, I'm curious if you can give us some categories or examples of things that it's a one-time, you want remote monitoring, but it's really okay just do once or occasional. Patient complains of something, you want them to be able to take this one-time measurement at home and then maybe take a week later, let's say, versus a wearable kind of thing that's more continuous. Are there examples maybe you can give of where one versus the other would be more helpful?
Sure. Well, one that and this is all very theoretical, but reading that in some instances, researchers are able to measure ionized calcium. That's an electrolyte in the blood that's really important for life. There's a condition called hyperparathyroidism, where your body overproduces, one of the glands lives in your thyroid, overproduces hyperparathyroid hormone, and your calcium levels go very high, and that can present with a number of clinical symptoms. So oftentimes the surgery to treat that is to remove the hyperparathyroid gland, but then after you've done that, you run the risk of someone's calcium falling too low. And hypocalcemia can present with you know, seizures and cardiac abnormalities and can also be really serious. So I was thinking, you know, sometimes, and I'm not a surgeon and, you know, this is like a very specialized kind of care, but there is that, you know, the patient has the surgery, you're going to need to monitor their calcium for some period of time until they reach homeostasis. And that's probably, you know, hours to days. But rather than keeping them in a facility where you're drawing their calcium every 6 hours, you know, you could send them home with something like this, where it looks for a couple of days and then you're done. Versus something more continuous, you know, if we're really dreaming here, like patients who have chronic conditions where you're following a result serial over time, you know, a PSA test, let's say, or, right, because the PSA, the prostate specific antigen, we use it as a marker for prostate cancer, but it's a very complicated, you know, it can be elevated for a number of reasons, and it can be up and down and up and down. And so if someone's had cancer, you know, oftentimes their doctor's like, well, come back and we'll check it in 3 months, and we'll check it in 3 months, and we'll check it in 3 months. But you're really looking for a trend. So, you know, they could go horseback riding one day and it throws it out of whack, and then they have to come back, and it would be much more useful to have something that they would wear that over time could show you, okay, it really is trending up and we're seeing this. In real time versus, you know, 3-month little snapshots. So that's just a couple of examples.
Dr. Skarcik, did you have a follow-on?
Yep, yeah, I mean, more examples to build, for example, in renal disease. Right now, we have a paradigm around the globe where we basically have very, very infrequent measurements of renal function. Either complicated radioactive measures that are very precise and that you do in special labs, or we take more simpler blood tests, and then we do a calculated and estimated estimation of the renal function. And it's been shown that the estimation is actually quite valid and it's very useful. And it's two types of analytes. It's either that you can do that by measuring a protein called cystatin C, or you can do a metabolite, creatinine. And what we see is that, I mean, it will be a tremendous paradigm shift if we can do that much more frequently. Just that simple blood measurement, because it's been shown by regular venous blood samples that if you take measurements once a week instead, you have a much better understanding of the disease trajectory, of treatment response, but also you can segment and understand the variance of this. And that could potentially transform how you both manage severe, but also how you manage moderate renal disease so they don't become severe. And that's just one example. I can go on elaborate on heart failure as well, where we have circulating biomarker that are as good proxy for an ultrasound or other imaging method as well, that are validated as well. And that could also transform the clinical care, but also transform how we do drug development in those diseases as well.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what you're saying, Stanko, I think the renal metabolite or following renal function is really interesting too, because clinically, you know, when patients are heading towards end-stage renal failure and they might need to go on dialysis, at least from my experience, sometimes it feels like it's a guessing game. You know, it's like, we think they're heading that direction. We don't know exactly when it is. And there's decisions you really need to make in order to be prepared. So they might need a dialysis fistula, you know, a graft to be placed, and that takes time to mature before you can use it. And so having this more continuous trajectory of how their kidney function is deteriorating or not would enable you to avoid those situations where you thought you had more time and suddenly the patient's in acute renal failure. Now they're in the hospital, they have high potassium, they have to have a central line put in. You know, it's making something that you could have be much more controlled, which would be a better experience for the patient and much more cost effective from the uncontrolled, which, you know, really dangerous and emergent and resource intensive. So I think that's an exciting idea.
You know, Dr. Leitner, I mean, I think you prefaced it really well, which is to sum it all up into establishing and identifying risk of the highest at risk of. In an ideal world, you know, we're reorienting our entire care system to be less reactive and more proactive. And so as we do that, and let's just assume that this is happening over the next 10 to 20 years, and there's going to be a point in time where we have the sensors, both biochemical and physical and computer vision, et cetera, to where we're able to identify very well the high at risk. And I'm going to move this to Dr. Skurtik for a minute. I would imagine then drug development and therapeutic deployment becomes very different, and what your entire kind of mandate is from AstraZeneca perspective, modifies, because now you're so far upstream instead of backstream. Do you have thoughts on that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, and that's also the trajectory where we're moving. So, for example, we see that we would like to move in much more virtual clinical trials, both because we can see that could speed up clinical development. We can more quicker bring innovative medicines to the patients by doing that. So we can shorten the clinical development timeline. So that instead of something takes 8 years, maybe we can do that in 4 years, and removing the white space and make it much more efficient. But then we see that could also transform and just right away move into clinical practice as well. And we're working across all of the major disease areas that we're involved in, both in oncology, in respiratory, and cardiovascular and metabolic disease as well, with a number of initiatives trying to move into sightless or virtual visits, basically. And by that, when we've kind of established and documented that in R&D, then actually move that out into clinical practice as an adjuvant together with our drugs. So that's also, I would say, not only we in AstraZeneca, the industry is moving in that clearly in that trajectory.
Yeah. So go, Dr. Leitner.
Well, I was just going to say, when I think about that, I also think about, in addition to speeding things up, I think that you add a lot of diversity to the kind of people who can participate in clinical trials, which is so necessary. So geographic diversity, people who maybe are not that you have, just like people who have mobility issues, you're being more inclusive in who can participate, and that's only going to help with the real world applicability of whatever solutions you're coming up with. So
correct. And also the retention in clinical trials. So instead of having 7, 12, 15% dropouts, you lower the threshold for people to participate in R&D. So you have a more representative inclusion of participants, and they also will complete there. And another thing that we and everybody are moving in is that we want to do real-time analysis in order to speed things up. We would like to, as quickly, if we want to have a measurement once a week, we would like to analyze the data once a week on all of the subject, continuous data analysis in the clinical trials. And that's basically something that when this becomes a product, it's also something that we would like, that it's something that the treating physician later on can do with our drug product as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Marat. This is
quick question for Dr. Skrit. So considering the first 1 month of the, let's say, COVID patient, what would be the important biomarkers in blood, for example, so that we can monitor continuously, or maybe in the future we can translate this into like non-invasive methods. For example, we can monitor it from saliva or sweat or interstitial fluid.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not enough read up onto COVID and the early pathophysiology. I would not dare to pinpoint and select just one single biomarker there. I don't know if you, Dr. Leitner, would like to.
I don't think we know. That's the problem. I don't think anyone knows. So I think it's for sure being studied, and it's really interesting, but I think it's too soon to be able to have to have something that would affect your clinical decision making. But I'm not an expert either.
I mean, the few studies I've seen has been quite advanced molecular analysis that they've followed over time. We have these sequencing approaches that was quite heroic from Germany. They did very frequent sequencing once every day for everybody that went to come into a clinic during a month. But I mean, that's very advanced things. And also advanced fax analysis that you do every single day to follow the immune response. I mean, that's a heroic biomarker exploratory work. And I didn't see anything that was simple that popped out from that. And that was a small sample size, just a couple of dozens of patients. Yeah.
So actually that emphasizes maybe even more where I think for you, Murat, as a researcher, that's got to provoke some excitement. One, that the things you're developing are very relevant, and then two, that the tools you're developing could really help with a real gap, right? So anyway, curious for your thoughts about Dr. Leitner mentioned PSA, Dr. Skirta mentioned creatinine. At least we know those are important targets for care. What do you? Maybe I should just ask: do you see a possibility of those right now with the sensors that you're developing or that you know of at the research phase?
Mm-hmm. So in SWET, non-invasive biomarkers such as creatinine or other biomarkers of renal systems such as urea or uric acid is also present. There are already non-invasive electrochemical sensors for detection of these biomarkers from SWET. I guess I believe more importance should be added to how those biomarker levels from non-invasive biofluids correlate to gold standard measurements such as blood, so that we can better understand the trends of the biomarkers over time. For example, if it is a 3-time measurement in a day or 1-time measurement in a week. So more importance should be added to how these biomarkers actually correlate to the gold standard measurements, such as capillary or venous blood growth.
So maybe a question then as well is, are some of these sensors at a point where they could kind of supplement the kinds of studies Dr. Skirtic is talking about, at this stage, to even correlate with the more traditional measures? So if we were able to begin even now collecting these kinds of samples and testing them, especially if instruments already exist, do you see potential, to advance our understanding of COVID?
Of course. From the perspective of monitoring those biomarkers from SWET, for example, the first thing is to understand how body filters certain biomarkers and which one it doesn't filter actually. So, for example, let's say glucose, body actually filters glucose and it's not secreted too much in sweat. So understanding this filtering and partitioning mechanism of biomarkers into non-invasive fluids, this is the first step. Once we understand this, we can actually develop non-invasive sensors for continuous monitoring those biomarkers and giving feedback to the patients or the doctor for remote monitoring. And it's important and it's possible.
So I have a quick question from the perspective of form. In my head, I have a wristwatch as a wearable. What other form factors are there? What can we expect, on the market? Obviously, the CGM is connected by way of some level of connection to the body ongoing. But what other form factors are there that you're looking at that we might see in the coming years or years out?
So in this case, it really depends on the biofluid of interest. For sweat, for example, the sweat glands are distributed all over the body. And because of this, different continuous monitoring devices are developed. For example, it can be a chest strap or it can be a patch. You can adhere to your arm, your wrist, or it can be a watch, similar to Apple Watch, for example. It can monitor biomarker levels and also it can monitor the physical sensors, for example, oxygenation, pulse rate, or heart rate in combination with other biochemical levels.
Very helpful. So I'm, a Band-Aid
Sure.
that I strap on to my 6-year-old to measure over time eventually without them, with the Mickey Mouse on or Minnie Mouse on it. Seems feasible in the future.
Definitely, definitely. Especially from the academic perspective, new continuous variable devices in form of like patches. This is called like epidermal electronics or thin film electronics. This has been a topic we're heavily researched. So in this area, researchers, they integrate sweat collection systems and biosensors and also the electronics in flexible and stretchable format so that this thin film can actually, it's like a tattoo, can give a biochemical information and continuously transmit the data to your cell phone, for example.
Very cool.
What about like contact lenses? Like what can you tell from direct contact with the eyeball? Anything?
Right. Yeah. I believe in previous years there was a development from Google, Google Lens for continuous measurement of, I guess that was glucose, but that project has been stopped. I guess in terms of fluid collection and generation of the tear fluid and correlation of the biomarker levels to blood. So, but I don't have too much information on that for now. But it's feasible.
Yeah, the different form factors have been interesting. It just, understanding or being familiar a little bit with the assist work, just to see some of those different ones. I wanted to come back on something, Dr. Leitner, that you mentioned about increasing diversity in clinical trials. It made me think about diversity in care or expanding access to care to take that one step further. And these right now are very advanced technologies being developed. What does it take, I guess, or what are the kind of considerations that you would have in mind if the goal is to also improve access to care for people who it might be harder? I know that's a broad question, and there's a lot of space to explore there. But we often think about if these technologies, we don't want to just see the field advance for the people who can afford the latest, greatest, right? We want to see this really expand care. Just wonder if you can give some points about what kinds of things or what features or what considerations need to be brought into account to ensure that.
Right. It makes me think about just the low adoption of telehealth, even just, a phone call, a video call to your physician had such low adoption before COVID for a lot of reasons. And some of those reasons, I think this is what you're asking, are like regulatory, privacy, doctors saying, is it as good as in-person care? I'm not sure that it is. And what is my liability? And so I think that all those issues extend to novel uses of technology as well. It's like, is it going to work? Is it going to be reimbursed? Can I trust the information? Who has access to that information? Is it legal for me to do it? All of those issues are relevant here as well. Does that answer your question, Brian? Or were you meaning more from the actual, maybe you could ask me again if that didn't answer it.
Yeah, well, since I rambled on, understandable if it got lost. I was thinking about considerations of cost and even, I don't know, maybe form factor, or how do we, just more generally, if you have thoughts about how do we get it to a diverse community and design for a diverse community.
Or include that community in the development process. I think one of the things that we see, often is those participating in design and development of solutions generally are not those that those said solutions are particularly directed towards. Think low socioeconomics, think rural, think et cetera, and obviously you care for, you're a medical director for a transgender medical home, which in itself is very unique. It has a specific a set of perspectives that may not be part of the development process and the commercialization of technologies or offerings. Do you see, and much, and I'll kind of just take a part B to this, much as we talk about the biopharm coming down to the ground and studying real world and understanding kind of data streams at the edge, that seems to be more and more the necessity of getting to an N of one understanding of what we're solving for. Again, I don't know if there's a question in there or just an excitement to
Well, I think, I don't know if this is on the same page, and I'll try to stay off a soapbox, but I think when we have universal access to care, for everybody, that we're putting our resources towards, instead of reacting, like you said, to when someone's super ill, but just preventive care, universal care that's focused on the social determinants of health also, like, I don't want to say socialism is the answer here, but I think when you're trying to become more inclusive, if there's no broadband out in a rural area that doesn't have socioeconomic strength, right, then none of this is you can't include them. So it's not so much just the healthcare system, it's like our society at large. It's just making sure that everybody has access to what they need to have a good quality of life.
If I can expand on that, I mean, if you really would like to have really broad access, you have to acknowledge the huge diversity that we have among us humans in terms of, for example, health literacy. It could be eyesight, hair sight, it could be technical literacy, it could be skin type. I mean, if it's going to be applied on a 77-year-old woman with a paper-thin skin, she doesn't want to have a Band-Aid for a week on her skin, because when she takes her off, she gets a wound of it. Yeah. So you have to, it's so many diversities that you have to take into when you're looking on a solution. And it basically means that we won't have one technical platform that will solve all. It won't be one fix for all. I think we're going to have quite a lot of many niche offerings to serve all of this diversity. Some have the full functionalities, some of these solutions will have partial, because otherwise we won't make something that is truly patient-centric and actually user-friendly in the end, that it will be used. Because if things are not being used, then it's no point that we're doing things. It's the same thing that we have a problem with all of our drugs, irrespective if they're inhaled or oral or topical, that the compliance is so poor. Or not only that you don't use them in the right way, you're not using at the right time or at the right dose or at all. And when you look on those numbers across disease areas, it's mind-blowing. I mean, the rule of thumb is half of the people take the drug at the drug or therapy as they should after 6 months. I mean, it's across diseases. Doesn't matter if it's cancer or if it's asthma or if it's diabetes. Yeah. And that's that's a challenge. And then on top, you have to put on advanced diagnostics or sensing as well. How will that complicate things, or what will it really mean in a patient setting?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the last estimate I saw was the medication adherence market opportunity for solving that problem is upwards of about $300 billion. And so it just kind of shows the significance of the problem that we're dealing with, specifically in that we can build a novel therapeutic or treatment, but the adherence, the compliance, the behaviors, back to your point, the social determinants, the behaviors, the underpinning of what a day in the life of a human being really is seemingly where our greatest lift might come in the 21st century, right? And as we look at, and as I challenge, our community and anyone, that I get a chance to, in terms of anchor perspective of where we are today, we have a tendency to think we're in the future today. We have a tendency to think that we're driving the future at the moment. The reality is we're at the very beginning of the rest of the 21st century. Yep. Effectively 1920 in the 21st century, right? Where the car is just coming out and 95% of us are trying to make horses faster. Yep. And so, given that perspective, hopefully we can all, bond together and band together and work together to define that future, asking a lot of these and being knowledgeable and kind of mindful of these many very important aspects of who a human being is and what's needed for them to solve against.
Yeah, but also untapped opportunities. So if we take this regarding compliance and the promise of biochemical sensing, I mean, there's a huge untapped potential that we haven't really explored there, because you can measure maybe in a simple way a biomarker they can use as a motivation factor, basically a feedback loop that can, even if it can't be used for clinical decision making, it could potentially be used as a motivating factor. I can see some type of disease progression or treatment response by doing that, and that might motivate me to continue with the treatment or be more aware of my disease. I mean, I have barely seen any of those studies out there, or that people have tried to focus or scope into that direction. But that's a huge untapped potential, because the promise that we have with biochemical sensing is it's low cost, is easy to use, and it can measure things with the clinical grade accuracy. And I mean, then it's a matter of creating the right package that goes with it for a certain segment where it might work.
Yeah, these aspects are huge, I think. So really helpful insights on those. We promised to bring in some audience Q&A. We've gotten some good ones. Want to bring this one probably to Murat first. One of the questions is, what's the reason continuous glucose sensing has advanced so much, but others like lactose sensing have not? Is there something fundamental on the sensing side that's limiting our ability to bring those sensors as far as glucose monitoring has come?
So in terms of lactate sensors or glucose sensors, let's start with that. From the sensing perspective, there has been a significant research in the past for development of stable enzymes for glucose detection. So those enzymes, they can be used reusable. They can be used for long-term monitoring. But still, for the lactate sensing, for example, from the sensing perspective, it's really about the stability of the sensor for long-term use. So enzyme might just like degrade over time, and it can just, the enzymatic activity can be lost. So, and this limits the sensor's usability for long-term monitoring. Second, I guess, to answer this question is more about the population. There has been significant advancement in the continuous glucose monitoring because the population for diabetes, diabetic people, it's significant, it's really high. So there was a market, so, and therefore, there have been many improvements in continuous glucose monitoring.
Yeah.
So it seems like the market drove, in a lot of respects, the prioritization and the fast tracking or the maturity of, less the technical limitations of.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, I don't know, Adam, did you have one last thing?
Well, I was going to mention one of the other audience questions, and then I know we probably need to wrap up. Great question about biomarkers for COVID. I think we did touch on that and get some real good insight on that. So appreciate that question. And I do think as I'm looking at the time now that it might be time to wrap up this one. It's been really exciting. So I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Yeah, no, I feel like we could go on for another hour and then figure out, what to do together to start to play and move in advance. But that is the sign of a wonderful conversation and a great discussion. From the bottom of our hearts, on behalf of DHIT and Assist, Adam, myself, thank you, panelists, very much for taking the hour to support our vision of uniting during this time and our call to action to drive discussion and a level of collaboration to both discuss and drive progressive thinking, but also to act. And we'll get into that in a second. So thank you, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you, Dr. Leitner, Dr. Skurtik, Murat. We'll be back with you shortly. As it relates to 2 weeks from now, a quick reminder, we have a session focused on big data and the determinants of health. So what a setup this session was to drive our session in 2 weeks. We'll have details coming out forthcoming by Wednesday of next week with our panelists. So stay tuned on that. 9 a.m. July 10th. Adam.
Yeah, and you just hit on the call to action, and so what we've been pairing along with this is a virtual incubator to facilitate that. And so you can see here on the slide how those two have run alongside each other, and the webinars, the discussions here, informing opportunities and needs out there for new solutions. So we wanted to remind everyone of that. You can see the URL here. So I encourage you to go and learn more about that and participate. We also do want to let you know that we have some exciting refinements coming in the next few days to the incubator to make it easier to navigate the website and to understand how you can bring your innovations and solutions onto the path to take those things to the next level. And so we have some sponsors who have been very gracious in bringing in support at every stage. And so if you're thinking about your innovation, the things you're working on, and do they fit? Is there support for it? If it's not on the market yet, I almost guarantee you that there is. And you can see how the sponsors are really bringing in support at every level, from discovery all the way up to delivery to the market. So we remain very excited about this and where this is going to take us and take some innovations, and having support for multiple ones as we move along. With that, we're going to close out today. I want to reiterate Michael's appreciation to our panelists and to those who have joined us. It's been another exciting discussion, a lot of great insights. So we are signing off for this webinar, and everybody take care and have a great day.
Stay well and stay safe. Cheers.